Douglas, how are you, sir?
Very good, thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I can't thank you enough for your voice and your logic and your reason. You are one of the more powerful people out there, and I think that's why you're being targeted. Did you happen to see the article that I was talking about with Anna Stanley?
Yes, I did. I read it with considerable alarm. This is a young woman who worked for the Foreign Office. She was an open intelligence analyst, sent on a government training program to learn more about counter-terrorism, counter-extremism. And, of course, she revealed in the piece that, first of all, several of the participants, the lecturers, completely downplayed Islamic extremism when terrorism, which the British government does regard and the intelligence services do regard as the primary threat to security in the UK.
And no mention of immigration playing a role in that. None.
No, of course not. Of course not.
Yeah.
Why would they talk about anything that was truthful?
Yeah.
But more alarming to me was, even than that, was the fact that one of the lecturers, a man called Peter Newman, who's a very sinister figure in my view, said that the main threat, or one of the main threats, was from so-called far-right people. And he named me and Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan.
Podcaster friend.
Let me quote the two paragraphs that says this. The lecturer further argued that Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan are both examples of the far right. To what extent, I'm quoting, should Joe Rogan and Douglas Murray be suppressed? He asked. They have millions of followers. To deplatform them would cause issues. Whoops, did we lose him? Concluding his talk, the lecturer told a room full of government professionals, so society needs to find other ways to suppress them. Is Douglas with us? You getting him back?
Easiest way to suppress him is to hang up on him in the middle of the interview.
Exactly right. That's the private sector suppressing him. I'll tell you that right now.
There you go. We see what side you're on, Glenn. Yeah.
Well, no, it was a coincidence, and I've deleted all my files about hanging up on Douglas Murray.
Oh,
it's accident. Yeah, it was crazy.
That's sad. That's sad. It's amazing to be the people who are actually targeted in the middle of this too. It's like, it's one thing to talk about it as an issue. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, well, these things may happen or they are happening, but like when it's happening to you, obviously, Glenn, you were named in that article. I was not. Just to keep the record clear. But it's got to be hard to go through it, right? When you're the one actually named. Yeah, he's back.
I think, Douglas, you're back. Thank you. I'm sorry we were just suppressing your voice there for a minute. What's really frightening here is I've been talking about this stuff coming for a long time, and we've been hearing reports that they're doing this or that. They are so outspoken on this and so bold, and they are so far down the line. What do you think's coming for you?
I don't know, other than that there's no way anyone on earth is going to suppress or silence me. But I do think it's extraordinary, the confidence that certain people have that they can suppress those of us who say things which I think are not only popular but true. But I thought it was fascinating that this man who has almost no following or recognition himself and who's an expert in a non-expertise, that he should think that he could or other people should suppress me. And since it wasn't just about suppressing my voice, I've got my lawyers writing to his employers to find out what he has in mind for me.
Yeah. They were in that very thing. They were talking about using banks and everything, and we know they're doing this. I said about 4 or 5 years ago that there's going to come a time where they are going to build a digital ghetto, and I know all the implications of using those words, and I was called an anti-Semite and everything else. But that is what they're building. The Jews can talk all they want. They can do whatever they want just behind this wall. So nobody sees them or hears them. And that's exactly the direction we're going.
Yes, and there's very particular moves that they're doing to make that. One is this use of the term far right, which alarms me enormously because, of course, there are some people, particularly in Europe, who are what we would call far right. They're nowhere near the centers of power, but in bits of Germany and elsewhere, there are very nasty things in the woodshed. And unfortunately, what people have done in recent years, as you well know, is that in the name of really nothing other than political opportunism, certain people have decided to extend the parameters of what is allegedly far right. And what they've done is they've extended it not just to people, as on this occasion, it's absurd to call me or Joe Rogan far right, palpably, demonstrably absurd.
Yes.
But what they're really doing is they're trying to make public opinion be deemed far right. And not just some public opinion, but majority public opinion. Most people in the United States and the United Kingdom are deeply concerned about illegal migration. But once you say concerned about illegal migration is far right, therefore the majority of the public are called far right. And that has a lot of implications these people don't think about. First of all, is that, of course, it makes actual far right become completely normal because you're just saying, oh, well, everything's far right now. And the second thing it does is that it defames and libels majority public concerns, which are legitimate concerns. Americans are right to be fearful about the implications of having an entirely porous southern border. And Europeans and British people and others are completely right to be concerned about having a totally porous southern border. And to call these concerns extreme or to try to chuck them out of the mainstream is something so anti-democratic and anti-the populace that I'm just very alarmed the way in which this was caught on.
Well, I don't know if you've been following Davos. I'm sure you have this week.
Of course.
But they're making mis and disinformation the number one priority. And here in America, we've already had the Wall Street Journal. We've had 2 stories now from NBC News this week on disinformation. Listen to this paragraph in the story from NBC News. An increasing number of voters have proven susceptible to disinformation from former President Donald Trump and his allies. Artificial intelligence technology is ubiquitous. Social media companies have slashed efforts to rein in misinformation on their platforms. And attacks on the work and reputation of academics tracking disinformation have chilled the research. So they're making the case that anybody who is even considering voting for Donald Trump, you've been captured by disinformation, which leads you to where Jordan Peterson is today. You've got to go to a re-education camp.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that this whole concept that there are experts and then there's us plebs.
Yes.
Part of this problem. And the problem is not just how rude it is about us, the people, we the people, to coin a phrase. It's the fact that these self-appointed experts are not expert in many occasions. The BBC has a disinformation expert now, and she keeps on pumping out disinformation. She keeps on getting things wrong. Well, normally, that's the ebb and flow of journalism. One paper publishes one story, another paper says they're wrong. That's fine. But this idea that we have this sort of new priesthood class of academics, experts in disinformation. Sorry, as the person we were just mentioning earlier from King's College London has shown, academics are perfectly capable of pumping out lies and disinformation. Well, I would, to cite the famous Bill Buckley quote, I'd rather go to the first 100 people in the phone book to find out what's true than say the board of Harvard University.
Yes. There's a story in the Washington Examiner that just came out. Listen to this. While the Department of Homeland Security has allowed as many as 10 million immigrants into the flood our southern border, domestic surveillance state has prioritized something more important. According to documents now unearthed by the Media Research Center, DHS paid $700,000 from a counterterrorism program to a self-described propaganda network The source of the funding was Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program, which was created by Barack Obama to target Al-Qaeda. That was put on hold and then clandestinely revived by the then acting DHS head, Kevin McLennan, and Miles Taylor. The infamous and insufferable anonymous resistance within the Trump administration. The funding circumvented the White House budgeting process. The beneficiary of the grant under President Joe Biden is the University of Rhode Island's Media Education Lab. In their application for the money, it said propaganda can also be used for socially beneficial purposes. Indeed, because the public has long recognized as being suggestible, the United States has long made use of the beneficial propaganda during World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. So what they did is they were the source coming after MAGA supporters and saying that they're far right, anti-Semites. This is funded by our government. And they're the ones telling us about disinformation?
Well, that's the other thing. So if I was somebody in the situation of government in the last 15 years, I think I would want to try at least to take a look at myself and wonder where I'd gone wrong, you know? And you don't see that humility at all. I would wonder, instead of saying the public don't trust scientists anymore, I would say, what have the scientists done in recent years and scientific experts like Dr. Fauci, what might they have done that slightly led the country into doubting scientists? If I was a political pundit or a political expert within government in Washington, I would wonder, not what it is that the public have got wrong, but what it is we have done in recent years that has undermined trust in the democratic process and much more. And I never see it,
Never.
As a writer and as a thinker, I try to do I try to be self-critical. I try to think about whether I've got something wrong. And these people just don't. They're never wrong. It's always us, the public, that are wrong and need to be corrected.
Okay. Douglas Murray, what should the average person do? Because this is with more people voting for their officials, more than any time in U.S. or world history, this year, more people will be voting in free and fair elections, hopefully, than ever before. What do we do? How do we solve this? Because they are going to start putting us one by one behind a wall that will not be easy to spot at first.
I think it's increasingly easy to spot, if I can say so. I think that the public today are so much more informed. We are so much more informed than we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And one of the things is that a lot of tricks that could have been pulled on us 30 years ago are now very, very transparent. We have media that can address the problems when, parts of the mainstream media get things wrong. We are no longer able to be simply lectured to or sermonized to from a pulpit at the New York Times. We no longer, have a sort of innocence that we had as a public in the past. And I think that's a good thing. And it means that we're all beholden to sort of know more, admittedly, and to see through more. And to recognize just as it's true that sometimes we are told things that are completely true and we should trust some authority some of the time, we also shouldn't be completely trusting. And we can be skeptical. And we can, do our own research, to use a phrase that is now poo-pooed by the so-called experts who say that it's dangerous for the public to do their own research. We shouldn't be endlessly cynical, but nor should we be endlessly supine. We shouldn't be endlessly trusting, and we don't need to be. If somebody simply gave you one opinion on something incredibly important in your life, you probably wouldn't follow it. You probably want to check. When I get motor insurance, I don't go to one place for my insurance. Going for it, I look around. Well, if we can do that with our cars, we can do it with our lives. and we can do it with our political future. And that's what we're all doing. And anyone who says, I'm the only font of news, I'm the only font of correct opinion, don't trust anyone other than me, is somebody you should distrust. And that, frankly, the Washington Post tagline, democracy dies in darkness. Well, yeah, sure it does. And media can die in darkness as well. And sometimes the people who say we're the only ones you can trust, like the Washington Post, might just be the ones who end up slipping in some fibs along the way.
Yeah.
That's what they've done. And I think that we, the public, are in a much better position now than we ever have been before to see through it.
Douglas, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything.
Such a pleasure.
You bet.
Great pleasure. Thanks.
So, by the way, talking about the Washington Post, here's the headline from the story that he was referring to. Doing your own, this is Washington Post, doing your own research is a good way to end up being wrong. Well, yeah, you could be wrong, but just listening to the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN and even Fox News, you got an equal chance of being wrong there. Do your own research. Never close your mind. Never stop asking questions. Humble yourself so you're not arrogant. I know what the truth is. Always be open to hearing a different opinion. And you will find the truth. Prayerfully, you will find the truth.